In the last video, we were talking about how to set up our session for Midi, and we got some notes in there, and this is the same session here. So now we're going to talk about the Midi editor window, which can be accessed through Window Midi editor, or this is I'm in a macro, so this is a symbol for control equals. So if I click on that, it brings up a window that shows me, it's sometimes called a piano roll in a lot of other DAWs. So I just do control equal, brings up the piano roll window. So I would use this window to create and do any fine-tuned editing. I would never edit MIDI notes in this window. You can do that if you want to, and back in the day you used to have to do that, but I just recommend against it. It's much better to edit in this window where you can see the windows and zoom in. So let's talk a little bit about how to configure this window to get it set up nicely. So one setting that's very, very helpful, of course, turn on the keyboard focus, that little A to Z right there. If I play here, it's scrolling nicely. That's because this setting is right here. This little top right drop down scrolling page is set. That might be set to no scrolling, and it might be frustrating and you won't advance the window. So make sure that is set. So that is the drop down, the MIDI edit window pop-up menu. Scrolling page is my preferred setting. That's a really important setting so you don't get frustrated. And my favorite way to edit in here, you have a separate grid value here. So here I would like to be at 16th grid value. And my favorite way to edit is usually with the Smart tool. So I believe you can just double click and put in a note. So this is a way to enter notes if you don't have a MIDI controller. So you might be limited if you don't have a MIDI controller, or maybe you don't even play keyboard, so maybe it won't even be that helpful. It's kind of fun to have a controller, but if you don't, you can come in here and start to enter stuff. So what I like to do is just double click, get a raw note in there, and then with the Smart tool you can trim it. And look at, I'm in slip mode here. I want to go into a grid. There we go. Now I'm in grid mode. Now it's going to snap to 16th notes, which is what I want, so I can get some rhythms there. So a good hack I really like is just to use this tool most of the time. I rarely use the pencil tool or the scrubber or anything else really. And so if you want to form a chord, for example, hold down Option and just drag the note. So let's make like a major triad here. And then Option. So now I have a major triad there. So then I can take this whole thing and like do a 1-4-5 progression. So let's say I want to go. So now I have 1-4, but we want to use good voice leading. So maybe this will go up an octave. I believe it's Command up. That didn't seem to work. Control up. Let's go up diatonically. Anyhow, so here's a. Some funny chords there, but you get the idea here. So you can double click, put in a note, and then drag the duration however you want it. And I like this for this crosshair. You can just kind of drag, and that should work in most any tool. If the selector's on there, then the selector will work. I just like this Smart tool, all three of them at once, and then you can trim everything and so forth. And I could take whole blocks of data, all these chords here, right? And move this whole thing, transpose that up, what have you, undo it. This is also good to come here to clean up, to fine tune your MIDI performance is what I'm doing. So maybe I can just delete some of these things. So that's enough to get you started editing and making notes. And just to review, if you didn't watch the first video, go back and watch it. I'm making sound because I have MIDI information on this piano track here, and it's playing this mini grand piano. But let's make another instrument here. I'll try to stick to some of the ones that you have. Instrument, and I will install the Expand. That's another one you guys should have. It's the first time I've launched it. I just installed it. Here's Expand. It's a pretty decent sounding. There's a lot of different sounds in here. And hitting my MIDI keyboard, not getting anything. There is one setting that you guys should know about, and I believe it's MIDI through. Where is it hiding? So when you don't know where something is, you can just search it. MIDI. I'm looking for MIDI through. Looks like it's turned on, so that should allow me to play this, but it looks like it has to be in this configuration of Pro Tools. I have to record enable the track. Right, so this has a lot of great sounds here. It just started with a bright pad, but let's say I want to change it to something else. Let's say I want to have something more percussive, so drums. So this is kind of confusing. It has a lot of these individual hits here, but if you go up here to the factory default and go to drums, there's actually a whole pop kit here. So this is great. And if you've done MIDI drums, you know where everything maps here. So it was like the C is the kick. So I can do something like that. So I just wanted to show you how to add another instrument here. And we're using all instrument tracks here. We're not even using MIDI tracks. There are MIDI tracks, but let's just use instrument tracks for now. We'll describe MIDI tracks. They're even more simple. But instrument tracks are unique because they actually, that kick you're hearing is actually outputting an audio signal. Because MIDI is not audio. So that's our instrument track. And a workflow that I would suggest for you guys is to zoom out in this edit window here. And I'm not kidding when I like to have my grid resolution in the edit window as a bar. So do you guys see that? I have a bar resolution so I can trim and make chunks of MIDI clips. See how it chops off the front of the notes there? MIDI was invented in 1983, and if you look at my other PowerPoint presentation, there's MIDI 2.0 that's coming out, and there's some other MPE, MIDI polyphonic expression, which is kind of like the next wave of MIDI that's coming, because the MIDI protocol is a little bit, I don't want to say it's dated, it's actually quite useful and good. There's nothing really wrong with it. It's lasted for nearly 40 years without a revision, which is crazy when you think about computer programs and stuff like that. However, what was I going to say here? So about this clip, this behaves just like an audio clip, just like an audio waveform clip. So all the things you guys know how to do, like option dragging off and what have you, work great. But these, I kind of hastily recorded these. So let's record another one. And this is actually a great review. So how do I do that? I could just hit 3 and it starts recording, but actually looks like I'm in the drum set here. So let's play it on a drum beat. Do a kick and a snare. And I got a little bit off there, but here's my drum, so I would just immediately click on it. And my timing is a little bit funky, but let's say I want to keep the first bar here. This is why I like to be in grid mode here for one bar. Now I made one entire loop. So I could quantize that if I wanted to. I should probably just play it again. But the idea here is that this is one big MIDI loop chunk that I've created that I can just option drag and create a beat. Right? So before I would do that, I'd probably want to go in here and fix it a little bit. I was a little bit off. And it doesn't have to be totally on, but let's quantize it. I'll just quantize it real quick. So, and I like to quantize in this window just to show you what it did. So my performance should be better, but it's probably good that it's not right on and you can see how Quantize works. So everything is done from this event menu, event operations, Quantize, and this brings up the event operations window where you drop down menu, you can get to all these useful transpose and things like that. So I'm just going to quantize, note on, and I'm just going to go to 16th note and just watch the notes here. So quantizing is just snapping to the nearest note boundary. And, you know, hopefully that sounds good. It's okay. It sounds a little bit square. So I'm actually going to step back there and do that again. So I'm going to select the notes. So here's before. So I got a little off there. I did some weird like delayed triplet. But I wanted to show you a little trick because when you quantize, if I go 100%, I like doing this strength thing, maybe not 100%. Maybe like 73, so I'll get a little bit of the humanized feel. So let's apply that. So I quantize now. Let's undo that again just so you can see, zoom in here a little bit. So you can see what that just did. Let's quantize that a little bit. And you can see exactly what the quantize did. That's why, see how I just shifted ever so slightly? But it's not totally on the grid here, especially where I got off. See how it's a little bit ahead of the beat? So it preserves a little bit of the feel, because if you quantize 100%, it sounds a little bit like a robotic drum machine. Not always the best feel. Yeah, that's better. So I'm just kind of cleaning up this loop so that, let's say this were drum beat A. So now this is one great 2-bar loop. Well, it's okay. It's not so great. But I'm ready, now that I'm locked in to this bar level, I can do some really quick editing. So this is a great workflow to, quickly create my beat here. I'm going to duplicate it 4 times. I'm going to mark in here, hit record enable on this piano track, hit record. You get the point there. So I could just play along, and hey, now I can just go in here and clean up my bass line. So double click on this, and here's my bass line. You guys get my drift, right? So I can come in here, trim that back, dun dun boom, and then hit a weird note there. Maybe I was just hitting a grace note or something. But maybe this is my next and maybe I don't like this note here. So something like that. So that could be a loop in and of itself. And again, I would do that editing here. And look, you got to be careful though, because MIDI is so literal and binary. See how if I trim that back, it chopped off that note? And that's because, let me mark in here. Where is this? Oh, it was down on my range. That's because this note is ever so slightly before the beat. So MIDI is really stupid. So there we go. You have to kind of trim that note back, because MIDI just sends notes, says play this note and then stop playing this note. So if that play note message is before this, it'll cut off the entire note. That's just a setting in Pro Tools. It's perhaps a waste, but let me trim that back now. Boom, there we go. And now my bass is there. I'm going to split this. It's going to be B, because keyboard focus is on right here. B, chop it. And now I have my bass line ready to go, and maybe I have a bass line. But here's the versatility of MIDI if you guys didn't know. Let's say I don't like the grand piano and I want something different. I want a bass type of sounding thing. Vacuum, you guys should have. This is an analog synth. I'm just going to go to my bass presets. I go to the factory default. So it's really, really easy just to change the sound of something like this. So something like that. So I can just kind of just put another plugin on there. I think that's enough to show you. I like working in loops in the MIDI window. That's a great workflow, working with loops. And depending on your keyboard skill, maybe you can play something like a solo or what have you. You could mouse this in as well. So if you don't have a MIDI controller, you have to mouse that in. I think that's enough to get you guys started on the first week, which is basically composing 4 different tracks of MIDI information. Let's leave it at that.